Jesus and John the Baptist could have had it easier if they compromised. There's a lot that we can learn from Jesus' actions and John the Baptist's actions in the 14th chapter of Matthew, where we learn that they did not compromise. They stuck to what God told them, and it was to their own personal detriment, but for God's glorification. So this is really important for us to know that we should just always do what is right, no matter what. If we know it's right, just do it. Don't worry about looking after your own skin. John the Baptist, as we're going to learn here, this is where he was beheaded. He could have changed his message to try to get released from prison. Jesus could have not preached so hard and telling people how to live rightly before God, and but they didn't. And so I want to pull out of this so that we can learn from their incredible determination to follow God no matter what, and how that can pass over onto us so that we can increase our faith and do good deeds along the way. So, why don't we read chapter 14 of Matthew in our series on discipleship on the book of Matthew? And it's the first 21 verses of that chapter. So, here we go. So, pay attention as I'm reading this to you of what sticks out to you, what questions might you have at the end of this that you'd love some answers to, and just take some observations of really what's going on. I really want to encourage you to think of Jesus kind of like John the Baptist in the humanity sense of the word. We understand that if John was beheaded as a prophet, he didn't have any special power to stop him from hurting or from going. But a lot of people have this tendency to think that Jesus just kind of hovered everywhere he went and never experienced pain or difficulty. But yet we know that in Philippians chapter 2, it says that Jesus hung up his divinity, as it were, and he came here as a man, lived as a man, and everything that he did that was miraculous was through the power of the Holy Spirit, and a demonstration to us on that we should be connecting with the Holy Spirit to do these things. So Jesus would have had very real human emotions in this setting and in this time place. And so as you see and find out what Jesus is doing, let's see if you can't kind of sort out what he might have actually been thinking at the time, beyond just teaching what he needed to teach. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard of the reports about Jesus, and he said to his attendants, "This is John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead. That's why so much miraculous powers are at work in him." Now Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. For John had been saying to him, "It's not lawful for you to have her." Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of the people because they considered John a prophet. On Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for the guests and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." The king was distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted, and that John was beheaded in the prison. His head was brought to him on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. When Jesus had heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed, he saw a large crowd, and he had compassion on them, and he healed all their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it is already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages to buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." "We have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here to me," said Jesus, and he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and he broke the loaves, and he gave them to his disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were very satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 baskets of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides the women and children. You might be thinking, what's going on in Matthew's mind as he is kind of connecting, moving from the parables where Jesus is explaining what kingdom life is going to be like and the persecutions that are going to come, as well as the glory for those who stick with it. Now we move on into here. This flows actually quite naturally from a literature point of view, is that the next demonstration after the parables is John the Baptist sticking with it, giving up his own life. So this is a teaching tool, is the way that Matthew assembles us. This is all real history that happened, but the way that he is assembling this is to help people to become good disciples. And so when he's teaching in the parables, Jesus is telling people The crowds are teaching, and if they want to know more, they need to throw some skin in the game. God expects us to do something in return to what he has already done for us. He's not going to do all the heavy lifting for us all the time, but he wants us to have a faith response. So those who would come and ask Jesus, can you give us the interpretation to the parable? These would all be people, as I mentioned last week, that will be dead soon because they're going to follow in Christ's footsteps of not giving up and not compromising. And so this is a natural flip over that as Jesus' fame is now spreading, and in Tiberias, which was the capital for Herod in that region, was only about 8 miles away. And so word could spread quite quickly to the area. And they find out that, that John the Baptist had quite a strong preaching ministry too. And we don't have much as a way of recorded of miracles by John the Baptist, but this now another preacher coming up doing some amazing teaching that's gaining tons of followers. And now there's miraculous signs attached to it. This is why Herod is, of course, alarmed, thinking this got to be John the Baptist coming back from the dead. And so I'm just going to go into a few observations on A, John the Baptist, B, Herod, the situation, and then get on to how that even folds into and Jesus leaving the villages, probably for his own protection, but the crowds follow him. And so he ends up feeding them in a field. But we'll get to that in a minute. First, let's talk about John the Baptist. It's hard for us to underestimate how important he was. He was the last of the Old Covenant prophets and the last one to die as well. This is like closing out the end of the Old Covenant with John the Baptist. He was a much greater preacher than what the Bible gives him, I don't want to say credit for, because the Bible does teach him and show him well. But to not eclipse Jesus, it is kind of basic and to the point. First century Jewish and now new Roman, Josephus is a historian, and he writes about John the Baptist from his perspective. And he's looking at it, and he thinks Herod is looking at more of an uprising that might happen. So he wants John the Baptist out because there's thousands that were following John the Baptist. It wasn't just a small crew that might be implied by the few instances John's mentioned in the Bible. But Josephus sees him as someone who is on par, if not even greater, at least at this point, than Jesus. And so I'd like to read you a couple paragraphs out of Josephus' works. And this is what his interpretation, his understanding, and that his contemporary times of what actually happened to John the Baptist in Herod's fortress. To some of the Jews, the destruction of Herod's army seemed to be divine grace, certainly even a just vengeance, for his treatment of John, surnamed the Baptist. For Herod had put him to death, though he was a good man, and he exhorted the Jews to lead righteous lives, to practice justice towards their fellows, and piety towards God, and so doing to join in baptism. In his view, this was a necessary preliminary if baptism was to be acceptable to God. They must not employ it to gain pardon for whatever sins they have committed, but as a consecration of the body, implying that the soul was already thoroughly cleansed by rightly behavior. When others too joined the crowds about him, because they were aroused to the highest degree by his sermons, Herod became alarmed. Eloquence that had so great an effect on mankind might lead to some form of sedition, for it looked as if they would be guided by John in everything that they did. Herod decided that it would be much better to strike first and to be rid of him before his work led to an uprising, than to wait for an upheaval. Get involved in a difficult situation and see his mistakes. Though John, because of Herod's suspicions, was brought in chains to Machaerus, the stronghold for which we have previously mentioned, and there he was put to death. Yet the verdict of the Jews was that the destruction visited upon Herod's army was a vindication of John, since God saw fit to inflict such a blow to Herod. So you can see that even the first century Jews were saying this was a good guy, and he was very famous, and he was very eloquent, and spoke in many sermons to which thousands had followed. And so we can understand why, with John being such a prominent figure, of so many people following him, of why he had needed to say these words about Jesus once Jesus came. Because he must increase, I must decrease. And in some strange way that might not seem fair, maybe it was important for John the Baptist to go to heaven so that he would not be followed by so many afterwards, so that we could turn our eyes towards the Savior. John did what he was called to do, and he followed it right to the very end. Now, here's the interesting thing. The Bible talks more about the morality of the situation than the political that Josephus was talking about there, of just trying to quell an uprising. But what's interesting to note is we'll go through, switch to Herod now. Herod had been leader for quite some time. He was only 17 years old when Herod the Great died. You remember that, the Christmas story? His dad was the Herod that tried to kill baby Jesus. And so he reigned for quite a long time, from just a few years, 4 years BC to 39 years AD. So he reigned for another 7 years after about this incident. that we're talking about here. And he was a powerful man, and he had married another king's daughter and lived with her for 15 years. But then when he went to go visit his brother in Rome, it wasn't Herod Philip that was the other ruler in the Middle East. His brother, his half brother, was one living in Rome as just a private citizen at that point. And he stayed with his brother, and then he met his brother's wife named Herodias. And he just absolutely fell in love with her. Well, she demanded that he, if they're going to get married, they decided to get, she divorced Philip, and then she demanded Antipas not to keep his other wife, but to get rid of her. And that's why, as you saw referenced in that Josephus quote, that a couple of years later, he is deposed by that little lady's father in part because he disgraced her daughter and through that divorce. So Herodias is already quite a demanding person back in Rome. No, she wants the only seat when it comes to being in the queen's chamber, and she's here demanding yet again. She's really upset at John the Baptist's teaching. It doesn't seem like Herod is all that worried about John's teaching, but she is more miffed at it because she's saying that her position and safety and would be at a risk if Herod were to actually act righteous. Now, some might say that this is an indication to show that when somebody gets divorced, they should never remarry, because if you do, it's always a continual act of adultery. But that's not necessarily what's in view here. The whole point of getting a certificate of divorce that God permitted was so that the person could get married again, to prove that they weren't already betrothed to somebody else and free to remarry. That was the purpose of it. Now, again, we read before, and we'll get there again in Matthew 19, the more particulars about that. But so we won't really address that much here. So this is why John the Baptist said that as it went on, it was still unlawful as it continued, notwithstanding that they probably shouldn't have divorced their spouses in the first place. And it was this willy-nilly attitude towards marriage to which Jesus condemns the most, saying that we need to be one man, one woman for life. Yes, there's forgiveness when there's mistakes, and there's certain parameters to which you can get remarried, and there's others that you probably shouldn't, especially if it's relatives. And so Jesus warns of hard-heartedness when it comes to relationships, and he asks us to be dedicated and to love one another. But we'll get more into that when we get hit chapter 19, where we dive into that as one particular topic. But now off onto the rest of this. This dance that she does, this is a normal thing that kind of happened in palaces. Remember, this is like a palace fortress, so there would have been like a dungeon in the basement, as it were, and there would have been a room for entertaining. And as you regularly entertain your officials, it kind of keeps them on your good side. You really want your general to be your buddy, unless he turn on you and you have a coup in your own kingdom. And so that was a common practice to throw parties like that to try to solidify your inner circle of people. But in this regard, Herodias' daughter comes in and does some sort of special dance that pleases him. And when we think of this, I've looked through many, like, what kind of dances would young ladies do at this. I didn't find anything righteous. I'll tell you that. And but you can't say for certain. The Bible doesn't say it. We don't really have reliable evidence to suggest that what it was, but just other than that, he was very thrilled with what she did. And it was a common expression for a ruler to show his generosity when asking for a gift, or asking to give a gift to somebody, that you have up to half of my kingdom. That was even hundreds of years old by this point. Of course, he never expected her to say, I want half your kingdom, nor did he intend that she would do so. Common hospitality would be, because he throws such a large opportunity for you to ask, that the smaller the gift that you ask for shows just how humble you are and grateful. So it's kind of this little weird back and forth culture of the day. But prompted by her mother, there's lots of things I'm sure that a teenage girl could have asked for from a king that would have been a little bit more pleasant to have than a dead man's head on a plate. But nonetheless, this Herodias, who made Antipas get rid of his wife, and she even tried to get rid of her own brother, when her own brother, when a neighboring Caligula was the Roman emperor at that point. So she goes and says, I don't want my brother to be in this particular area, because that would be seen that he is better than my husband. So she didn't even want her brother. She's highly competitive. Didn't even want her brother to be able to be seen as a greater king than her husband. But nonetheless, her brother and Caligula were actually best friends, and they end up getting, after they got defeated by that army, Caligula sent them to modern day France, what was then called Gaul. So she came to a pretty ruinous end, as did he. So as you can see, she was very concerned about her image. She wanted her husband to be number one. She wanted to be number one wife. And then with John the Baptist preaching to thousands, that would make her look bad in public. So if she ever went out, everybody would just be looking at her going, John the Baptist says you're an adulterer. John the Baptist says you're lawbreakers. And that, of course, really cheesed her off. And as it were, she got the chance to tell her daughter, ask for John the Baptist's head. And he couldn't, when you make an oath, you really can't break it. And so now we know that he's alarmed because John was already powerful, but he was alarmed that the crowds, what they might do, but he has to do it. And this is what he does. So this is why you don't make oaths so quickly. And it's why we are careful with what we're actually doing. And we don't use our power to hide sin and to get our way. We must always just do what is right all the time. John the Baptist at the end, he could have said, no, 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 okay, God will permit it if you do this or that. No, he stuck with it at the end. He said, what is right is right. And he lost his life for being in the right. And Herod and his wife end up losing theirs because they didn't. So then next, they give the body over to John's disciples and they go and tend to him. John's parents would have been long deceased by this point, being elderly when they had him, and maybe no living relatives. And they go and they look after, give him some dignified end to his life that ended so corruptly, so wrongly. And then the next thing we find out is that word gets back to Jesus, and Jesus is sad. Like, if they killed John the Baptist, I'm next. I can't see any other reason for Jesus saying, let's get out of the villages, because there's magistrates and authorities in every village. And he'd be thinking, like, I just need to get out of here. They're going to come and get me. And so they went to where we believe now is just another couple miles to the southwest of where they had been in Capernaum, to where there's fields that we do believe this event took place. So we often just read things in the Bible like John the Baptist was beheaded because Herod was jealous. Okay, then we have and disobedient. And then we have, Jesus feeds 5,000 people because they followed him and then they're hungry. And we don't realize that all these things fit together perfectly, and one thing pushed the other. Jesus doing ministry, that word gets back to Herod. Herod gets alarmed. And what happened? Herod was alarmed with John the Baptist. You don't want Herod alarmed with you. And so Herod was alarmed. Jesus found out that Herod was alarmed, and he goes, I got to get out of Dodge. So they jump into the boats. But then the people are just so desperate for a move of God. They're so desperate for God to touch their lives that they follow on foot. And just probably about 2 or 3 miles, they end up beaching again on this area where there's lots of grass. And then he sees them. He goes, these people are like helpless and harassed. These people need to be taught. These people need to, no matter what is at risk of my life, I still need to do my job. And so he does. And as night approaches, they would say, hey, this amount of people, which would have been more than 10,000, because it's 5,000 men plus women and children, that would have been a great deal of the population of that whole area, like probably more than 10 to 20% of it within a day's walk. And so he tells them, well, you feed them. He's obviously telling them something to increase their faith or to test their faith. They kind of freak out and say, like, what? It's said in the other Gospels that they even said, not even 8 months of wages would feed all these people. And Jesus takes what appears to be 5, not loaves of bread, but like loaves of bread, which would be like little cakes, and these couple fish. And then he prayed a blessing over them, and he just started handing it out, and it just kept on going. That would have been a provision for one person for about an entire day. And like if you were to go into the hill country, if you're going to go grazing sheep a little further away, you'd dry your fish or you pickle your fish, and it'd be suitable for a day or so for you to go with your little loaves to go on your little journey. So this is what one person out of all the people that went, only one was prepared for that scenario, and it was a little boy. And so remember, if you're worried about the authorities, even being in a crowd, there could be spies and plants there. So even with that threat of Jesus' own life, of being arrested, he had already been tried to be killed before. They'd already have plotted to do so, and he already knows that. So he's now as he's out there helping these people, and now he's feeding them. And it says they're all satiated. I've had some skeptics say, oh yeah, everybody just probably broke a little tiny piece off like we do in modern communion. And then the 5,000 people each had a crouton. And it's like, no, it said they all ate and were satisfied. Plus, they took away a lot more bread and fish after it was over than what they started out with. So clearly, it truly did multiply in great ways. And that was also a sign, because it was the Old Testament saying of that God brings forth bread from the earth. And he just kept on going and kept on serving the people, even while probably having to look over his own shoulder. We don't quite think about that aspect when we usually read that he feeds it. We think it was just peaceful and tranquil time where everybody loved him, but yet he knows he has spies and enemies all around. And so after this is where we get the famous where Jesus walks on water. We'll get to that next week, but you need to understand the reason why I think that Jesus sent the disciples out was to be a bit of a decoy, to let the crowds disperse. There goes the boats. Okay, well, Jesus is gone now. And then maybe if there was going to be some spies, he'd watch them take another boat and go out after. But Jesus went up to pray because he is seriously worried about his own ministry and life right now. And he spent the night in prayer after he fed all these people, after he sent them home. But we'll get more into that next week. And so with all this teaching of like showing how this fits together in the whole book, how Jesus' ministry is fitting together, what he's doing to look over his shoulder, what I want you to walk away from today, this is always a takeaway. I always want to try to help someone say, what do I actually do about all this? This is some fun facts that I've learned about Herod and John the Baptist and a few other things. But what do I take away from this? Well, this is a demonstration that Jesus had been teaching. Guys, I want you to do what is right, and I want you to follow me, even when the going gets tough. It's going to be tough. It's going to be desperate at times, but it'll be worth it in the end. I promise you that. You'll wish that you did it if you didn't. And so here we go, seeing the example of John the Baptist and Jesus sticking with it, doing what is right, even when it hurts them. So I want to encourage you, when the going get tough, the tough get going. You gotta be pretty tough to be able to be a Christian. And so I want you to be able to hold your integrity when you find that you're just doing what you know to be right, even in the face of a great evil that might be coming against you. God will make you strong. He'll give you the right words to say, and his Holy Spirit will be there to guide you along the way. So as we continue on, I'm going to pray that God just helps us to be obedient and that we all do what is right, following in his own footsteps. Thank you for coming to church with me today. God bless you. We'll see you next time.
Let's do something together. Life is better in community. So let me encourage you to reach out to us via the Connect card that you'll see in the description at the bottom of this video. That's your opportunity to just say hi. Let us know you're watching. Let us know how we can be praying for you. Or maybe you have some questions about faith, about our church, or about life in general. We're here to help you, and we're happy to do so. I'd also like to thank those who are faithfully giving. I can't express my thanks enough. We're able to continue ministry in our community and abroad so wonderfully because of your faithfulness of giving the Lord's tithes and your offerings. So to go above and beyond his tithes is just incredible. And so for those of you who want to come and visit us, please know that our service is a gift to you. We never ask for anything from our guests. As a Christian, it is my act of worship to give to the Lord, and each one of us Christians believe that. So if you want to come check us out, there's no pressure. Just come on over. If you did want to give, we have simple ways. Give at regalchurch.com for your e-transfer, no password required. You can drop it in the offering plate on Sundays, or you can drop to the office through the week. Just pop in, say hello, and let us know who you are, and we'd be happy to chat with you. We can also set up automatic deposit. We'll just send you the simple form, and you fill it out and send it back, and it's good to go. So thanks for your time, and God bless you. Thank you.